Imagine standing in the harbor of Alexandria a little over 2,000 years ago. Two things dominate the skyline, and between them they tell you almost everything about this city. On a small island at the harbor's mouth rises a tower of pale stone, taller than almost anything human beings had ever built. Well over 100 meters, crowned with a fire that burned day and night, and a mirror that threw its light far out across the Mediterranean. Sailors could see it from many miles away. It was called the Pharos, the lighthouse, and it was counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And somewhere in the heart of the city stood a different kind of wonder. Not a tower, but a collection. A library that, by reputation, was attempting something no one had ever tried: to gather every book ever written, in every language, under a single roof. One building reached up to guide ships through the dark. The other reached out to gather the entire knowledge of the human race. Together, they made Alexandria, for a few centuries, the brightest city on Earth. And then, both were gone. The lighthouse fell. The library vanished. And ever since, we have asked the same dramatic question. Who burned the library of Alexandria? Whose fault was it? Which army, which mob, which emperor lit the match? But the more carefully you look, the more you realize the famous question may be the wrong one. Because the truth of how Alexandria lost its light is slower, stranger, and in some ways far more unsettling than a single great fire. Alexandria began with one of the most famous men who ever lived. In 331 BC, Alexander the Great, sweeping through Egypt, chose a strip of coast between the sea and a lake and ordered a new city built there, laid out on a grand plan and named after himself. He barely saw it. Alexander marched east, conquered as far as India, and died young, far from Egypt. His empire was torn apart by his generals. One of them, Ptolemy, seized Egypt and made Alexandria his capital. He and his descendants, the Ptolemies, would rule for nearly 300 years, down to the last of them, a name everyone knows: Cleopatra. The Ptolemies were Greeks ruling over an ancient Egyptian land, and they were ambitious in a very particular way. They wanted Alexandria to be not just a capital, not just a great port, but the single most important city in the world. The center of trade, the center of power, and above all, the center of knowledge. That last ambition was the unusual one. Plenty of rulers wanted wealth and armies. The Ptolemies wanted something stranger. They wanted to own the mind of the world. And to do it, they built 2 machines, one to pull in the wealth of the seas, and one to pull in the knowledge of everyone who had ever written anything down. Start with the wealth. Alexandria's harbor was its heart, and the harbor had a problem. The coast of Egypt is low, flat, and treacherous, with hidden rocks and shoals that could tear the bottom out of a ship. A city that lived on sea trade needed to bring its ships home safely. So the Ptolemies built the Pharos. Constructed in the 3rd century BC, it stood on an island at the harbor mouth and rose in tiers, square at the base, then 8-sided, then round, to a height that may have passed 110 meters. At the top, a fire burned through the night, and by day a polished mirror is said to have caught the sun, throwing a beam of light far out to sea. For the ancient world, it was almost beyond belief. There had never been a building like it. It became one of the 7 wonders, and it handed its very name, Pharos, to the word for lighthouse in several languages still spoken today. But the Pharos was more than a navigation tool. It was a statement. It announced to every sailor and merchant approaching from across the Mediterranean that they were arriving somewhere extraordinary, a city that could bend fire and stone to its will. Exactly how the builders raised it so high, and how the Great Mirror really worked, are questions that still tease engineers, because no complete plan of it survives. What is certain is the scale. For well over 1,000 years, almost nothing taller was built anywhere on Earth. Through that harbor flowed the grain and gold that paid for everything else, including the Ptolemies' second creation, far quieter and far more astonishing. It was called the Mouseion, the House of the Muses, and it is where we get our word museum. But it was not a museum in our sense. It was closer to the world's first great research institute, a place where scholars from across the known world were invited to live, supported by the royal treasury with a single task: to study everything. And attached to it was the library. The ambition behind it was staggering. The Ptolemies set out to collect a copy of every book in existence. Their agents bought scrolls all across the Mediterranean. According to the ancient accounts, ships docking in Alexandria were searched, and any books aboard were taken to be copied, sometimes with the copy handed back to the owner and the original kept. The kings wanted Greek learning, but also Egyptian, Babylonian, Persian, and Jewish. By tradition, it was here that the Hebrew scriptures were first translated into Greek, in the version known as the Septuagint. The hunger for scrolls grew so fierce that it shaped the ancient world in strange ways. When a rival library rose in the city of Pergamon, the Ptolemies are said to have banned the export of papyrus to starve it of writing material. And Pergamon answered by perfecting a new surface made from treated animal skin, the material we still call parchment. No one knows how many scrolls the library truly held. The ancient figures range from tens of thousands to 500,000 or more, and historians treat the largest numbers with real caution. But the exact count almost misses the point. For the first time in history, someone was trying to put all of human knowledge in one place and read it. The question was, what would become of a civilization that actually succeeded? What followed was one of the most extraordinary bursts of thought in human history. Because the library and the Mouseion gathered the world's books and the world's brightest minds in the same place, ideas collided and multiplied. The scholars of Alexandria did not only preserve old knowledge, they created new knowledge at a level the world would not reach again for a very long time. Here, a mathematician named Euclid wrote The Elements, a textbook of geometry so complete that it was still being used in classrooms 2,000 years later. Here, Eratosthenes did something close to magic. Using nothing but shadows, angles, and reasoning, he measured the size of the whole Earth and came astonishingly near the real figure. Here, Aristarchus suggested, centuries before Copernicus, that the Earth might move around the Sun. Astronomers mapped the stars, physicians studied the human body, and engineers designed machines driven by steam and water. Later, the physician Galen would study its medical texts. The engineer Hero built a device in which steam spun a hollow sphere, brushing against ideas the world would not truly develop for many centuries. And the astronomer Hipparchus compiled a catalogue of the stars so careful it was still in use more than 1,000 years on. This was the engine room of ancient science. For a few golden centuries, if you wanted to understand the world, there was one place above all others to go. It is precisely because Alexandria rose so high that its fall has haunted us ever since. The thought of losing all of that in one terrible moment is almost too much to bear. Which is exactly why we need to look very carefully at what actually happened. But Alexandria was never only a quiet city of scholars. It was loud, crowded, rich, and often dangerous. It was one of the most diverse cities the ancient world ever produced. Greeks, who ruled and set the cultural tone. Egyptians, on whose ancient land the whole city stood. One of the largest Jewish communities anywhere outside Judea. Later, Romans, when Egypt became part of their empire. Traders, sailors, and travelers from 3 continents passed through its streets. That mixture produced genius. It also produced friction. Alexandria was famous in the ancient world not only for its learning, but for its riots. Its communities clashed, sometimes violently. A crowd could turn on a ruler, a rival group, or a hated official with frightening speed. The same energy that made the city brilliant could also make it explosive. And out of that same volatile mix came more than scholars. It produced new schools of thought and religious movements that would help shape Judaism, Christianity, and Greek philosophy alike. Alexandria did not only store ideas, it generated them, and it argued over them in the street. This matters for our story, because the fate of the library and its knowledge was never only about fire and books. It was tangled up in the politics, the religion, and the street violence of a city that was always, in some sense, on edge. And that tangle is where the simple story we have all been told begins to come apart. So let us finally ask it. What destroyed the Library of Alexandria? The popular answer is a single catastrophe, one great fire, one villain, one night when the knowledge of the ancient world went up in flames. The trouble is that history offers not one candidate for that fire, but several, spread across nearly 700 years. The first comes in 48 BC during a war. Julius Caesar, trapped in Alexandria, ordered ships in the harbor set alight, and the fire is said to have spread into part of the city, destroying a large store of scrolls. But the library as an institution clearly survived this. Writers describe it still functioning long afterward. The second comes in 391 AD. By then, Alexandria was a Christian city in a Christian empire, and its bishop ordered the destruction of the great pagan temple known as the Serapeum, which had held a major collection of books. The temple was torn down. Exactly what happened to its scrolls, and how many still remained by then, is far less clear than the legend suggests. And the third, the most famous of all, comes in 642 AD, when Arab armies took Egypt, and a later story claims the Caliph Omar ordered the library's books burned. But this account appears only in sources written centuries after the event, and most historians regard it as a legend rather than history. 3 fires, 3 eras, 3 very different sets of hands. And the strange truth is that arguing over which one destroyed the library may be hiding what really happened to it. Because the most likely answer is also the least dramatic. The Library of Alexandria was probably not destroyed in any single fire at all. It died slowly, over centuries, of causes far more ordinary and far sadder than a blaze. A library like this was not a stone vault that could last forever on its own. It was a living institution. It needed money, scholars, and scribes constantly recopying scrolls before they rotted, and rulers who cared enough to pay for it. Take those away, and the collection does not need to burn. It simply decays. And over the centuries, those supports were pulled away one by one. Dynasties changed, and royal funding dried up. At one point, a ruler expelled foreign scholars from the city, scattering the very minds that gave the place its life. Political decline, neglect, the slow rotting of papyrus in a damp climate, the steady drift of students and teachers to other cities. No single one of these would make a headline. Together, across 300 or 400 years, they did what no single fire could. There is also a brutal fact of materials beneath all of it. Papyrus does not last. In the damp air of a Mediterranean port, an unread, uncopied scroll will crumble within a few generations, all on its own. A library that stops copying is already, quietly, dying. By the time anyone went looking for the great library to mourn it, there was little left to find. It had not been murdered in a night. It had been allowed to fade. Which leaves an uncomfortable thought. The greatest threat to human knowledge has rarely been fire. More often, it has been indifference. If the library's long decline had a human face, for many people, it is the face of a woman named Hypatia. Around the year 400, Hypatia was one of the most respected scholars in Alexandria, a mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher who taught students from across the Mediterranean. She was a leading mind of her age and a well-known public figure in the city. She lived, however, in dangerous times. Alexandria was torn by political and religious conflict, and Hypatia, a prominent pagan philosopher caught between rival factions, became a target. In the year 415, she was seized by a mob and brutally killed in the street. Over the centuries, Hypatia has become a powerful symbol, and like all symbols, she has sometimes been simplified and reshaped to fit a story. She was not, as the legend sometimes claims, the last librarian guarding the final scrolls. But her death does mark something real. The world that had made Alexandria great, open, argumentative, devoted to inquiry for its own sake, was passing. The city lived on. The age of its scholars was ending. The lighthouse, though, was still standing, and it would outlast the library by many centuries before the sea and the earth finally took it too. For all that Alexandria lost, the Pharos endured. Long after the library had faded, the great lighthouse still stood at the harbor mouth, still guiding ships, one of the last survivors of the wonders of the ancient world. But stone is no match for the earth itself. Egypt's coast sits near active fault lines, and over the centuries, a series of earthquakes battered the tower. Between roughly the 10th and the 14th centuries, tremor after tremor cracked and weakened it, until a powerful quake around 1303 brought much of it down. For a time, its ruins lay scattered on the island. Then, in the late 15th century, a sultan named Qaitbay built a fortress on the very spot, using the lighthouse's own fallen stones. That fort still stands in Alexandria today, resting on the bones of the wonder it replaced. And the lighthouse was not the only thing the sea claimed. Over the centuries, parts of the ancient royal city, palaces, temples, statues, the world of the Ptolemies and of Cleopatra, slipped beneath the waves of the harbor, where divers and archaeologists still find them today, lying on the seabed in the dark. The City of Light had become a city of ruins and drowned palaces. The story could have ended there, in the water, as a warning, but it did not. Here is the part the dramatic story of the fire always leaves out. The knowledge of Alexandria did not actually die with its buildings. Because for centuries, while the library still thrived, it had been doing the one thing that truly protects knowledge: copying it, teaching it, and sending it out into the world. The works of Euclid and the others did not survive because the original scrolls were saved. They survived because they had been copied and carried far beyond Alexandria, into other cities, other languages, other hands. Greek scholars, and later scholars writing in Arabic in places like Baghdad, preserved and built on what Alexandria had gathered. The earth that Eratosthenes measured is still the size he found. Euclid is still taught. You cannot truly burn an idea once it has been shared. You can only burn the paper. And Alexandria, at its height, had given its ideas away to the world faster than any fire could ever consume them. So the lesson of Alexandria is not only the warning, the danger of neglect, the fragility of a single great collection. It is also a quiet kind of hope. The light of that city had been scattered so widely that no fire and no slow decline could ever fully put it out. And 2,000 years later, on the very shore where the old library once stood, that light would be deliberately lit again. In the year 2002, on the waterfront of modern Alexandria, close to where the ancient library is believed to have stood, a new building opened its doors. It is called the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, and it was created as a conscious act of remembrance and of revival. Its design is no accident. The main reading room rises from the ground at an angle, a vast disk tilted toward the sea, meant to suggest a second sun rising over the Mediterranean, the same sea the old lighthouse once lit. Around its outer walls are carved letters and symbols from scripts all over the world, a modern echo of that ancient ambition to gather the knowledge of all peoples in one place. Inside are millions of books, archives, and a window for anyone who walks in, onto the learning of the whole human race. There is something quietly powerful in that. 2,000 years ago, from this exact stretch of Egyptian coast, knowledge and light reached out to the entire ancient world. Then it was scattered, drowned, and nearly forgotten. And now, from the same shore, in the same city, the same idea has been lit again and offered back to everyone. The original lighthouse that once guided ships through the dark is gone, but the deeper thing it stood for, the belief that a city in Egypt could be a source of light for the whole world, did not stay at the bottom of the sea. They said the knowledge of Alexandria was lost forever, but on the shore where it began, the light is shining again, reaching out as it always did, from the heart of Egypt to the rest of the world.